The kitchen door was cracked just enough for voices to slip through. "She's still here!" Mara's voice was sharp, like something snapping. "This house is ours now. Just send your mom to live with her sister or something." I stood frozen, the tea on my tray, rippling gently. The spoon clinked against the side of the cup. Jonah didn't say anything. Not right away. And then, quieter than her, almost tired, he said, "Yeah. Okay." That was all. No defense, no hesitation. "No, she's my mother." Just a nod in the dark. I turned around and walked back down the hallway, the tray still in my hands. The guest room door creaked as I closed it behind me. I set the tea down on the dresser untouched and sat at the edge of the bed, my own bed, technically, though nothing in this house really felt like mine anymore. Not since I gave it to him. Not since they moved in and changed the curtains, the locks, the handles on every drawer. Not since they stopped knocking before coming in. I stared at the framed print on the wall. Something store-bought generic. The painting I once hung there. Howard and I, standing under a tree smiling in some long-gone autumn, was now buried in a closet if it hadn't already been thrown away. I didn't cry. I just reached down and unlaced my slippers slowly, like my hands had to keep busy, or else they'd tremble. The silence was heavy, but I wore it like an old shawl. Familiar. It used to mean peace. Now it meant warning. Somewhere in the hallway, I heard Mara laughing on a phone call. Something about backsplash tiles and baby names. I lay back against the pillow and closed my eyes. The tea had gone cold, but I hadn't come here for comfort. I'd come to rest for one night, maybe two. After that, I'd have to decide what belonged to me and what didn't. This house used to have a heartbeat. Howard laid the beams with his own hands. I still remember the way he'd come in from the cold fingers, stiff boots caked in mud eyes full of plans. He'd lean over the table and ask how we were doing on the numbers, and I'd say, "If we skip the vacation, we can finish the porch." So, we skipped the vacation. We always did. I tracked every receipt, every nail, every paint can. He built upward, I held the ground steady. We raised Jonah here. He learned to ride a bike on the gravel path before it was paved. Howard built a little ramp from leftover planks, and Jonah cried when he fell the first time. But he got back on. That used to mean something. After Howard died, the house felt bigger and quieter. Jonah came back around more often then. He sat at the table and said, "Mom, let us live here. It's perfect for raising a family. We'll fix it up. We want to grow into it." I hesitated, but I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe I was passing something on, not giving something up. I agreed only if I could stay. He said yes. Of course he said yes. Now the porch swing is gone. Howard made it in the fall of '92 from salvaged maple and steel chain. Jonah said it creaked too much, and Mara said it didn't match the aesthetic. They replaced it with a box of ornamental grasses and a pair of chairs no one ever sits in. I wasn't asked. The flower beds I once filled with early bloomers have been pulled out, replaced with sterile landscaping cloth and stone mulch. I watered that earth for decades. My knees cracked against those bricks. I don't walk barefoot out there anymore. I pass this place to them with both hands. Now I walk its halls like a tenant. I only went to the bin because Mara asked me not to. "We've got it," she'd said, waving me off with that sweet, polite tone she uses when she wants me invisible. But it was overflowing. A slip of paper stuck out near the top, and the corner had my name, or what I thought was my name, cut off. I pulled it out. The header said property listing. Preliminary. The address was mine, ours, theirs, whatever it was now. There were photos already attached, angles of the living room, the kitchen, even the porch, though not from a time when Howard's swing still hung there. One line underlined in red stopped me. Must vacate current occupant before staging. Non-owner. My name wasn't listed anywhere. No note, no initials, no mention that I was part of this. just occupant. The word rolled around like something temporary, something disposable. I folded the paper carefully and tucked it into my sleeve. Didn't shred it. Didn't confront them. I closed the lid of the bin and stood there a long time pretending to be confused about the recycling categories. Back in the guest room, I opened the linen closet. The folder was behind the spare towels exactly where I left it. Howard had given it to me 3 weeks before the stroke. In case I go first, he'd said, don't open it unless you need it. Inside were 2 sets of papers. One was the original purchase agreement, land and structure separated for tax reasons. We had signed everything carefully, years before they started offering online signatures and drive-through notaries. The second was a handwritten note. If they ever forget who gave them the roof, this is your shelter. I read it 3 times, not because I didn't understand it, but because it steadied something in me. They think they own everything now, but they've never once asked who still owns the ground beneath it. The next morning, I called Howard's old lawyer. The phone rang 4 times before someone picked up. I recognized the voice immediately, Deborah Lattimore, Howard's attorney from decades ago. She sounded surprised I still had her number. I told her I had a question about a property deed, and she said, still the house in Ridgeview? I told her yes, though. I wasn't sure it still felt like mine. I gave her the parcel number, listed in the folder, the one Howard had labeled land use, retained. She was quiet for a moment, then asked me to hold. I waited, listening to the soft crackle of office silence. When she came back on the line, her tone had shifted. Varel, you never signed over the land, she said. Just the house. The transfer of the structure in 09 was filed separately. You retained ownership of the lot beneath it. Technically, they've been living on it under informal use. I sat back in the chair and looked out the window. The lawn was still damp from last night's sprinkler cycle. Jonah had programmed it himself. Now, I wondered if he'd even read the title when I signed the house over. I asked Deborah what I could do about it. She didn't rush. She explained the steps, slowly, kindly. Land severance, occupancy review, temporary injunctions if needed. She could courier the papers within 2 days. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt solid, as if the very earth under my feet had shifted just slightly in my favor. Before we hung up, she said, it's all still yours, Varel. They just forgot to ask. That night, I didn't sleep much. The wind brushed past the window screens, and I thought about every meal I'd cooked in this house, every beam Howard had hammered, every promise I'd believed. They were preparing to sell it, stage it, profit from it, without me, as if I'd just fade away like old wallpaper. But now I had documents on the way. They wouldn't even see it coming. I woke early and trimmed the grass near the old boundary markers. They were loud by 7. I wasn't invited, of course. The clink of glasses and the rise and fall of voices came through the kitchen walls like a reminder. Mara's friends parked along the gravel, one car edging onto the garden bed I used to tend with marigolds and squash. I didn't go out front. I stood by the back window, careful not to shift the curtain too much. One woman in heels, someone I'd never seen before, held a wine glass and gestured around the living room, with her free hand pointing at the fireplace, the bay windows, the stairwell. She smiled like it was hers. I watched Jonah nod along his hands, tucked into his pockets, his head tilted deferentially, like he was showing a model home. I slipped on my shoes and walked outside. The air was sharp and damp, the kind that clings to your clothes even if it doesn't rain. I crossed the yard slowly, counting steps, until my toe hit something hard beneath the weeds. I bent down and brushed away the overgrowth, the old boundary marker half buried but still in place. A chipped stone pillar no higher than my ankle, with the original initials carved in the corner, HM, for Howard Monroe. 3 more markers lined the outer edge of the property. I found them all. The wine night inside carried on. Someone turned on music. The bass pulsed faintly through the walls. I stood there a long time, not angry, just still. I didn't belong inside anymore, not as they defined it. But this ground still knew me. By morning, the documents were filed. Deborah confirmed it with a single-line email, land use restriction active, notice delivered electronically, and certified hard copy pending. I printed out the email and folded it into my pocket. Later that day, Jonah came in from the mailbox, eyebrows furrowed. He didn't say a word. Not yet. He placed the envelope on the kitchen counter and walked past me without looking up. They still thought it was just a warning, a complication, something to work around. They didn't understand this wasn't theirs to sell. Jonah found me near the fence line, trimming the lower branches of the old maple with a pair of dull clippers I refused to replace. He didn't ease into it. "What is this supposed to be?" he said, waving the envelope like it was something dirty. I didn't look up. "It's a notice," I said. "Formal land use restriction. You'll need to renegotiate your lease if you'd like to keep living here." He blinked, caught off guard by the word lease. "This is our house. The structure is yours," I replied, clipping another branch. "The ground underneath, it's not." He scoffed. "Mara's not going to let this stand." "I'm not asking Mara." He looked like he wanted to say more, something cruel or desperate, but the words stayed trapped in his throat. I reached into the crate beside me and handed him a manila folder, clean, crisp, marked clearly with dates and signatures. "I've included the new terms," I said. 30 days for discussion if you choose." Jonah took it without opening it. His shoulders were hunched like a boy caught cheating on a test. I turned back to the tree. By evening, the house was unusually quiet. The lights were dimmed. I sat in the guest room with my knitting and a lukewarm cup of tea when I heard the footsteps, sharp, impatient. Then came the knock. Not gentle. I didn't move. The second knock was louder, followed by the sound of her voice. "You're going to regret this, you know." Still, I said nothing. A third knock, then silence. After a pause, her footsteps retreated. The front door opened and slammed. I got up, walked to the window and turned off the porch light. Let them sit with the dark for a while. The next morning, I made a list bank county office notarized filing. One by one, the pieces were coming into place. The envelope came by courier this time. Deborah's firm didn't want any delays. I signed for it and slid it under the hallway mirror where Jonah would see it on his way to the fridge. By dinner, the silence in the house was brittle. I made myself a grilled cheese and ate alone in the sunroom. I heard whispers through the wall, low tense, shifting between outrage and panic. Mara's voice carried more than Jonah's all-clipped syllables and disbelief. The next morning, the for sale sign in the yard was gone, pulled out by hand. Someone had tossed it behind the shed. The buyers had walked away, Deborah said. "No one wants a title shadow," she explained. "You can't stage around that." 2 days later, Jonah caught me in the driveway as I returned from the bank. "You didn't have to do this," he said. "You're tearing the family apart." I set my purse down on the passenger seat and looked at him. "Family." He nodded. Shoulders squared, like the word itself could carry weight. "Were we still a family when I had to knock before using my own bathroom?" I asked. "When my porch swing disappeared? When I was no longer welcome at the dinner table?" He didn't answer. He looked down at the gravel, kicking a stone that didn't move. "I never asked you for much, Jonah," I said. "I gave you this place because I believed it would shelter you, not because I thought you'd erase me from it." He swallowed hard, still silent. Deborah's assistant called that evening to confirm the filings had been received. 14 days. That was the window. I watered the ferns in the back and swept the patio where Howard and I used to sit in the evenings. The chairs had changed. The view hadn't. The house felt smaller now, but the air outside was easier to breathe. I folded the notice and placed it inside the kitchen drawer, where all the takeout menus used to be. No one had cooked here in weeks. By the weekend, the moving boxes appeared in the hallway. They left on a Tuesday morning. No slamming doors, no final words. Just the soft thud of boxes, the scrape of furniture legs, and the engine hum of the moving truck pulling into the driveway before the sun had fully lifted. I didn't watch them go. I stayed in the shed, sorting through old tools. Howard's toolbox still smelled faintly of oil and cedar shavings. His notes, written in blocky pencil across scraps of cardboard, told me which bolts fit, which brackets. I gathered what I needed, set them out on the porch, and got to work. The swing had waited long enough. I sanded the old beams, measured the chain lengths twice, and drilled into the posts with slow, even pressure. My back ached halfway through, but I kept going. I had built this house once with him, and now, piece by piece, I was restoring the part they couldn't touch. By the time the truck rumbled away and silence fell again, the swing was up. I didn't test it right away. I just stood in front of it, resting a hand on the wood, letting the air settle around me. Inside the house was still. A different kind of still. Not tense, not quiet with resentment, but clean. Empty, without being hollow. I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat in Howard's old armchair by the window, the same corner where he'd read the paper every morning. I sipped slowly, feeling something in my chest release. Not joy, not triumph, just steadiness. That afternoon, I called Deborah and asked her to help me revise the will. No more inheritance to chase. No more expectations to meet. When I go, the house and land will pass to a local housing nonprofit. Maybe it will become a shelter. Maybe a home for someone who knows how to keep one. No heirs, no conditions, just a place that matters even after I'm gone. I tucked the signed papers into the safe. Then I stepped out onto the porch and finally let myself sit on the swing. The breeze moved gently, and I didn't move at all. By the weekend, the quiet had drawn attention. The neighbors started showing up again, the same ones who used to wave from across the street, but hadn't stepped foot on my porch in years. Ruth was the first, holding a pie, and a look that said she'd come for more than a visit. "We heard they moved out," she said, glancing over my shoulder into the house. "Did something happen?" I smiled and took the pie. "Things change," I told her. It was the only answer I planned to give. Later, Mr. Dyer from 2 doors down wandered over while I was watering the front garden. "Heard you stood your ground," he said with a grin that bordered on pride. "About time someone around here did." Others were less sure. One woman I barely knew folded her arms and muttered, "Family business shouldn't end up in court." I didn't bother correcting her. People always want a version they can tell over dinner, and I wasn't going to give them mine. That evening, when the sun began to drop and the air turned the color of smoke, I walked the edge of the yard with a small can of paint and a brush. The boundary stones were still there, some buried deep, others chipped or faded. I knelt to repaint each one, tracing the initials Howard had carved decades ago. His letters were firm, deliberate. It felt good to fill them in again. The swing creaked behind me, rocking gently with the wind. The yard looked bigger now, though it hadn't changed in size. Maybe it was just the absence of things that didn't belong anymore. Arguments, expectation noise. When I reached the last marker, I stood for a while, brush dangling in my hand. The street was quiet. Porch lights flickered on one by one across the neighborhood. I wiped my hands on my jeans and turned toward the house, its windows glowing faintly from the inside. Tomorrow, I'd start the final paperwork and close the last open file on my desk. I brewed the coffee myself that morning. No one had reset the timer. No one had used the last of the beans and left the bag empty. I opened the cabinet, and everything was where I'd put it. The mugs hadn't been shuffled around. The sugar tin was full. There was no pantry lock. No whispered conversations drifting in from the hallway. The house breathed differently now. I drank it on the back steps, the ones Jonah once said we should replace with something more modern. I liked the cracks in the wood. They held stories. Coffee in hand, I walked the yard in slippers and pinched the wilted heads off my basil. I'd planted new herbs the day before, nothing fancy, just what I'd use. Mint, chives, oregano. The soil still remembered my hands. Inside the safe in the hall closet held the deed. Not the version with loopholes and shared signatures, but the final one. My name clean and single. There was a note clipped to the back with Deborah's handwriting, all filings complete. Trust in effect. I didn't plan to read it again. Just knowing it was there made everything lighter. The porch swing moved gently in the breeze, rhythmic and slow. I'd tightened the bolts myself the day after they left. It no longer creaked, it hummed. The mailbox out front gleamed with a fresh coat of paint. I'd stenciled my name on it that morning, simple lettering, nothing ornate. Just V. Monroe in crisp black, so there'd be no confusion about whose house this was. I didn't look at the upstairs windows. I didn't pause by the hallway where Mara's framed photos had once hung. I didn't walk past the room Jonah used to sleep in. Not because I wasn't capable, and not because it didn't ache in some small way, but because none of it owned me anymore. This house didn't need to be given. It didn't need to be explained. It just needed to be lived in with both feet planted and no apologies.